All right, the last thing we're going to look at today is the talking about housing back in Australia. Now, when we have a first home buyers scheme, they've have existed in a various form over time. There'd be like assistance with their deposit, assistance with savings for deposits. Maybe first home buyers could access funding with smaller deposits. Basically, there are a variety of mechanisms like removal of stamp duty for first home buyers, certain offsets, a variety of bits and pieces to help people get across the line to be able to get into their own place. You didn't want to be sailing very close to the wind on them, usually, because you'd then still be left with an awfully massive loan that you'd really stretched yourself for, and you kind of hoped that any interest rate decreases weren't about to suddenly reverse themselves, because it probably wouldn't have ended very well. The These schemes of their various forms are still in existence, but the government is talking about expanding it at the federal level. So allowing uh, allowing first home prospective first home buyers to access the scheme with, well, more money, or to access properties that are a little bit more expensive. I mean, if the entire market goes up and you've placed a cap on how much money or the cost of a property that you can access under the scheme, it's like you don't want, if the average cost of housing is like 200,000, I doubt anywhere, uh, but you as a first home buyer say, well, I'm going to use it to buy $1 million mansion. The government is like, no, it's not meant for that. It's meant to help you get into your first house. Uh, a Probably a smaller house, but it's the idea to get you into the property ladder and get started. Not meant for you to be splurging on something massive. Right, good idea. But when the average property price is climbing through the roof and the scheme is not tiered or attached to it, then, well, the available properties you can access under the scheme dry up very, very quickly. So, what it is looking at here, um, they're saying that, look, that they've did a market analysis and only a third could be accessed like during under the scheme. So 1 in 3 properties could have been purchased using first home buyer help, and so they want to basically double that accessibility. Okay, clearly you're not going to be able to access all of the market on a first home buyer scheme, but yeah, on average 2/3. And I mean, particularly for the more built-up zones and regions and the cities and stuff, yeah, give up on the idea of a freestanding house for a little bit, and maybe live in an apartment or a unit for a little bit to while you build resources and equity and everything else to then help you then eventually move up to a freestanding home if that's what you're looking for. Plus, I think the greatest number of available residential properties that are being built now are units, not freestanding or even townhouses. So I mean, it's a good thing. I mean, right there, those incredible figures. If only 8 suburbs had accessible housing, but now 130 suburbs in Adelaide. I didn't even know Adelaide had 130 suburbs. Um, the same for Brisbane. Again, I didn't know Brisbane had 153 suburbs. I mean, if you told me Brisbane had 58 suburbs, I'd be like, really, that seems like a lot. Uh, but that's good. I think this is a really, really good thing to help people get their foot in the door and stuff, particularly if they'd been struggling otherwise to find those accessible housing. However, people are saying that that is going to push prices up. Well, more buyers means more options. We had that talked about that article the other day. Um, yeah, I mean, when the average house price is creeping over seven figures in, say, Sydney, then yeah, rising the cap on what a cost of a house you can access makes sense. Um, it's reflective of the market, which um, I mean, people knew for a while that prices in Sydney were starting to climb and settle over $1 million for housing. What had surprised me somewhat, looking at this was going back a couple of years, 18 months, when I think CoreLogic is one of the big property market analysis people. Um, they were showing average house price in Canberra, in the ACT of all places, had nudged $1 million in a bunch of suburbs. Now, if you're talking about the established in a north and in a south suburbs, yeah, okay, kind of makes sense here. They're massive older houses on large blocks, all that sort of thing. But no, they'd always been really expensive. What was nudging $1 million were houses that had been built in the 90s. LJ Hooker type, um, cookie cutter, off the plan type houses, not McMansions. These are the old bog standard, well, double garage, 4 bedroom type places. Maybe not even 4 bedroom, but or even double garage. Plenty of carports. Uh, but Canberra hitting $1 million. Now the reason for that is Canberra doesn't have a lot of free space left in terms of being able to extend for greenfields and things like that. Uh, they certainly used up a big chunk of that remaining green space when they plopped Gungahlin down. And I'm sure they're going to infill in some of the spaces around the place. But by and large, Canberra's lateral extent is probably about done. And so, like Sydney, you're now looking at having to increase the density of the existing housing supply, or, well, knock down and increase density that way, build higher density housing, or prices just shoot through the roof. Plus, Canberra traditionally has a very large percentage of the population that are well paid, good old public servants, and are on very stable incomes. Now, there's also a portion of the population that's on very unstable incomes, but certainly the public service sectors, government workers, all that sort of stuff, would be regarded as very stable employment. And there's always going to be a demand for places to live because government departments like to hang out in Canberra. So that's why partially Canberra's house prices hit $1 million before Melbourne's average, and Melbourne keeps spreading out. I think at some point Geelong will be merged into Melbourne. It used to be Bacchus Marsh, Point Cook area, Laverton. They were outside of the Melbourne metropolitan area. I mean, you're going back 20 odd years, you're talking a quarter of a century ago. Yeah, okay, things change a lot in a quarter of a century when you look at it that way. But they're now merged in, they're now part of, I guess, the metropolitan area, broader metropolitan area. And Geelong's not far off, I guess. Sydney's always been constrained by geography. Brisbane has been spreading out as well. The connection from Brisbane to the Gold Coast for a while was a highway. It's almost non-stop suburbs now, and I mean they keep making the highway wider and it just gets slower, but it's almost like non-stop suburbs from Brisbane to the coast now. Darwin's spread a bit. They had a big push when the rail line got connected properly. They built more units than anything else, and yeah, it hasn't really moved much since. But still, the idea that $600,000 for Darwin, that seems a bit expensive. Adelaide, there's been they have protected green zones in Adelaide to prevent excessive creep of the suburbs north and south and into the hills. So they're kind of constrained a little. So what they've done is they just sort of jump the gap and build on the other side. So the super adjacent settlements like Gawler are a lot bigger than they should be, but that's because people then just live there because it's a little bit cheaper, and then just take the road down into Adelaide proper, and it's not that far. Perth, they sort of prepared for the spread many years ago, and seems to have been filling in quite quickly. And I'm not 100% sure about Hobart, but the one of the markers I've always used as a guide for how a city is spreading, particularly an Australian city, is you look at where the airbase, where the Air Force base was or is, depending on if the city still has an airbase associated with it. The civil airfield, the um, civilian airfield, generally is in real close to the main part of the city. So if you look at, say, Sydney, the civil airfield, main civil airfield, is at Kingsford Smith, which is at Mascot, which is Botany Bay, which is not that far from the CBD. Uh, there is another major civilian airfield out of Bankstown, but the military airbase in Sydney was or is at Richmond, which is out past Penrith, and so used to be surrounded by farmland, a lot of farmland. Now a lot less farmland, and it's sort of being swallowed up by suburbs a lot more. They still maintain it as a military base, so that's still going to be there, and people just going to have to suffer for a little, deal with it. Melbourne, uh, Melbourne has Moorabbin, um, and has Essendon. Essendon is in real close to the city, i.e., being in at Essendon, but it's not the major airfield, civil airfield in Melbourne. That's well, Moorabbin is the GAA airfield. What's the name of it? Tullamarine, which was a fair way out of the city, but it was big, wide open land, so they could build a big, sprawling airfield. That's now being swallowed by suburbs. The air bases in Melbourne were out at Point Cook and Laverton, and like I said just before, they've been swallowed up by suburbs now too. They've not done any real flying out of Point Cook since they moved the old flying school out, but it's still maintained as a training base. Adelaide has, well, Adelaide Airfield, which is right next to the city on the coast. Then they have Parafield, which is a big general aviation field. Then Edinburgh, which used to be well north of the city. It had some suburbs around it. When Holden still built cars, they were just down the road from the airbase, so they had plenty of industrial capacity out there, and so there'd be workers living nearby. Plus, there are a few other places that set up in the big sprawling areas. Yet now it is also being swallowed by suburbs, with constraint, because on one side it's still farmland slash unsuitable to build on, but yeah, they're being swallowed everywhere else. Uh, Darwin's airfield, well, the civil and military share it, but it hasn't really been swallowed up as such. I don't think the expansion up in Darwin is going that far. I mean, there'd be more accommodation going into, say, Cullen Bay or in towards Larrakia or even down towards the harbour before they went out towards Berrima. I mean, there are settlements further out, like you go through the various like Palmerston and things like that, but they're satellite towns more than anything else. So yeah, Darwin hasn't really super spread out. It's too hot otherwise. Brisbane Airport is in northeast of the city, towards the coast, But the military airfield up there is out at Amberley, which is out towards the scenic rim. So you are talking well west of what's the name of the associated suburb? There's a city that's next to. Um, they keep having issues, but where it used to be completely isolated and had just had local settlement, again, the suburbs are rolling out consistently towards them. Um, Perth, Perth Airfield is like right in close to the city. They have, oh, I say Brisbane also has Archerfield, which is the general aviation airfield, which is halfway between the other two. Perth has Perth Airfield and Jandakot. So Jandakot is the civil light aviation airfield. They're both in relatively close to the city. And the airbase there is Pearce, or up in Busselbrook. Busselbrook? Bustle, yeah. Um, no, wait. Now, now I've convinced myself I've forgotten the suburb. But it used to be like completely isolated, um, relatively isolated from the rest of Perth. But again, the suburbs have crept out, and the airbase is not quite surrounded by suburbs, but they certainly are pressing hard up against it on a couple of sides. And so you look at it as, why did they build these air bases in the suburbs? Well, they didn't. They're all built outside the city. And it's just how the cities have expanded. And if you go back and look at the civil airfields, yeah, when they were first being used, they were on the periphery of the cities as well. So you'll go and look at Sydney now, with their second major airfield, the Western Sydney Airport International. Over time, that's going to be swallowed up by suburbs as well. So all these talks about caps for housing and things like that. Well, I mean, lateral spread is still going on. People are still building. Population's growing. At some point, that spread has to slow down, and people who want to live closer back into the city are going to have to accept apartment living or townhouses, that sort of stuff. So, but I mean, it is good though to see that the government is increasing supply to these programs to help get in. Now, it didn't actually say, um, I mean, the headline said income caps, but there's no mention of what the income cap is going to be. But the key part here is the mechanism of this scheme is 5% deposit and no LMI, lender's mortgage insurance, which is basically the bank forcing you to take insurance so that if the worst happens and you can no longer repay your mortgage, the bank gets their money. Not you, the bank. But that generally is a cost on top. And so when I was saying about, oh yeah, it offsets these costs, be it stamp duty and everything else, particularly for first home buyers, they're looking at, oh, this is the price of purchasing a house. Well, it might be the list price or whatever the price they've ended up on the contract, but then there's stamp duties, there's title fees, there's title searches, there's pre-purchases, PPIs, there's LMI, there's all sorts of these other costs that aren't well explained necessarily. And it doesn't actually say what the income scheme is. No, just the cap on pricing.